Hello, everyone, to the monthly Keep Data Private community call. You have Marcel,
Hiya.
and my name is Daniela. Good afternoon to a fantastic call coming up. Marcel, do you want to introduce the topic, or should I give a brief summary?
Happy for you to give a brief summary.
Okay, so what happened at the beginning of May is that a lot of people were talking about a law which was suggested at the beginning of May or leading up to the beginning of May when it was heard. That was done in Switzerland. And in summary, what it would propose is that every company, as soon as they have 5,000, not 5 million or anything, 5,000 customers that sign up to their communication devices, those companies would have to log calls and details, even going as far as maybe not having encryption, or if you have encryption, well, you have to store all of the data anyway.
And you have to install it unencrypted, or you have to be able to write it unencrypted.
Exactly. Now, in Switzerland, the way laws are done is that pretty much anyone can propose a law and take it through the normal process. There is a pre-hearing or pre-decision that runs the law past the early stages of government, and in this early stage, the law was killed, basically. It's not going ahead. There was a lot of uproar about it. All of the political parties have said, no, we do not want that. And yes, here we are talking about it. So, why are we talking about it? Why is it not a good idea to not talk about it? So, in other words, positive phrasing. Why do I personally think it's incredibly important to talk about it, and what the effects later on down the line would be? So before I go into a monologue, Marcel, over to you. Your thinking, your knowledge on it.
Well, I think it's interesting that it's coming from Switzerland because Switzerland has a reputation for their privacy, their banking secrecy. Now, it's also important to point out that that banking privacy is no longer something that Switzerland has. It's a reputation they have, but it's no longer valid. So if you bank in Switzerland, you can't be assured of your privacy in Switzerland. So it's worth pointing out that there's the myth about Swiss privacy and the reality. This indicates that Switzerland has an inclination to almost go to the opposite extreme. In other words, this would have completely violated anybody's privacy or any thoughts of privacy in Switzerland. What's interesting as well with Switzerland is that I think it was in the 80s or 90s of the previous century that there was a scandal in Switzerland where they were found to be keeping records about certain private individuals, even private individuals that had no arrest record. So there was one activist who was surprised to find that they had information on him dating back to 1965, right, about his attendance at various protests, even though he was never arrested at any of these events. But they had a record that he had attended them. So they had basically violated his right to peacefully protest without being basically labeled as a somebody who protests. Even though he didn't break the law, he was never arrested. He was, but they kept a record of the fact that he was attending these protests, and that caused a massive outrage in Switzerland then that this was being done, illegally, by the Swiss police. I can't remember exactly which department it was, but there was some law enforcement impact. And this proposal has come again from the Swiss law enforcement side of things. The argument again, and that's been pulled up more and more recently about violating our privacy, is all about terrorism. The reason you should we give access to all your data and all your information, all your communication, is because that's the only way we can catch terrorists. And what is surprising again about Switzerland is that fairly recently, I think it was in 2016, they actually voted on reduction in their privacy. So the public has actually said, yes, we would like you to be able to access data on our communication I don't remember exactly what the law was, but they were the public actually voted for it. So this is again a Swiss law that was passed to reduce the privacy advocated to the public, and the public said, "Yeah, sure," because they've been sold this terrorist fear mongering, and they should be for that reason they should give up their privacy. And as the old adage says, if you give up your privacy for security, you get neither. And there's a lot of evidence to show that reducing privacy does not improve security in any shape or form. If they can't catch criminals, it's not because they can't access their email. They can't catch criminals because they don't know who they are or whatever. But it's not because they can't read their emails, can't read their instant messaging chats, they can't read, anybody's, so they can find out who potentially is a terrorist, who potentially may be doing something. They need to be able to access everyone's data to try and find out who these people are. So I think that's the big thing, the fact that it's associated with Switzerland, who has both got a reputation that is no longer valid, has previously had a data privacy scandal where the data was being collected illegally, and recently they've even got the public so afraid of terrorists that they are willingly giving up their privacy. And this was a massive step in that direction. And I think it's good that it's not going ahead and that it's been cancelled. But as with all these things, the fact that people are even suggesting it is the concern.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. Now, for full disclosure, I used to live in Switzerland for a few years, and I was part of a Swiss group, or a group of neighbors who told me all about and taught me a little bit about the referendums, how the laws work, and so on. So I understand that the system works well in Switzerland, but just because this proposal for this new law failed now this one time doesn't mean it's not going to happen again and again and again and again. And at some point it will be successful. After all, if you try often enough, at some point you will succeed. It's often a mantra for successful entrepreneurs. So that's why, in my opinion, it's really important to talk about it. Not only that it failed, but to talk about what actually did they want in that bill. Whom is it going to impact? Is it the large companies and platforms, or is it the small and medium enterprises? What does that actually mean? Proton, for example, has said that they're going to move out of Switzerland because if that is a proposal now, what's going to happen down the line? And the alternative, sorry?
Do you want to just clarify what and who Proton is?
Oh, sorry. Proton is a company that I looked into when I was looking for a VPN solution. That's the context in which I know them as.
They're also an email provider, a secure email provider, an end-to-end email encryption provider. So they provide their users with encrypted email. And there was a fairly recent case where one of the Hague International Criminal Court judges has had their bank accounts in the UK seized, and as well has their Outlook email address blocked in the US. And he moved his email onto Proton. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether there's anything there, because if he's moving his email onto Proton, is there pressure from the US government, right, to access Proton email? And this is what's driving it. Who knows? But I think it's very interesting that Proton is being lauded as a secure encrypted email solution, but they would be very susceptible to that. They would effectively have to decrypt everyone's email by the law. Mm-hmm. This is what this law was suggesting. Yes. And therefore Proton encryption would be null and void.
Exactly. So again, this is why it's really important to talk about these cases, these situations and points, because there may be a connection. I don't know about it. I can't say either way, but there may be. And if we later on find out that there was or that there is, then would you be surprised about it? So if there ever is a situation where you think, if I found out X in the future, would I be surprised? And you say, no, I wouldn't. Then maybe it's time to think about it, talk about it with other people as well, find out what other people are thinking, and start digging and talking. And don't let things like these die in the dark and quiet in the middle of the night. It is important to talk about it. Yeah.
But it also goes to show how much our privacy is under attack. You know, um, that a secure email service like Proton is now considering leaving Switzerland. I'm not sure where they would consider going, but they're considering leaving Switzerland because if this law had become into force, their entire business model would no longer exist.
Exactly. Um, I just want to make a quick comment on your point that Switzerland has a reputation of banking privacy, because the privacy quite often in conversation that I'm involved in is around the banking privacy that definitely, most certainly, was available until the early 2000s, as far as I know. And then banking laws were aligned with more international European-wide laws where people, meaning the government, has access to certain banking information. So that has changed and largely is no longer available. It still is available for certain types of private banks. If you have a certain amount of money, then there are certain loopholes that would still allow you a little bit more coverage. But for normal people like myself, it's gone. And again, the reason why people are less aware about the current status of privacy around banking in Switzerland is because it doesn't come up in normal conversation that often. If you don't live in Switzerland, or if you're not traveling through Switzerland, or if you don't have a bank account that you inherit from somebody or other, then why would you have a reason to talk about it? And that, again, talking about it, having the information of what is currently the law, what is the current situation in the country you're in, as well as in the wider region. So I live in the EU. I want to know what happens in different countries in the EU, not only the one I live in, but I also keep up to date a little bit in Switzerland because I'm fond of it in many ways, and other countries I've gone through. It's really important what the whole region is up to, because a lot of times different countries in the same region have a tendency to go in the same direction. And again, the law in Switzerland is not the first country that is trying to get into your email. France had a few suggestions of how to circumvent the EU-wide regulations, and that failed. But they tried. Switzerland is trying. The UK is trying. Germany is trying. There's so many countries that really want to have your private data. We need to talk about it a bit more. We need to be informed. And of course, if there's any chance to say, no, we don't want that, then we need to do that as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this, again, is, again, how one views their data and the privacy of the data. I think the fact that Switzerland, and they voted in favor, like 65% of the population voted in that referendum to reduce their privacy on their data. How people believe that if you can access everyone's data, if I've got nothing to hide, people can access my data. I've got nothing to hide, and it's not about that. I think it's very important to realize it's not about whether you have anything to hide. It's the fact that you don't have anything to publish, right? This is my life. This is my information. This is my communication. This is what I'm doing in the world. Nobody else deserves to know, just because, if I choose to make that information public, that should be my decision. It shouldn't be someone else's decision as to what data they want to have a look at of mine. It's not that I have anything to hide, I just don't have anything to show. And I think that's all published, and that's the key. Or I choose what I want published. And also, it's who are the people that are actually accessing that data. We talk about law enforcement and things like that, but if you look at what's happening in the US, for example, the law enforcement are the ICE that are acting like the brown shirts of the Hitler era, where they're going out and basically breaking the law, and because you've got access to the people's data, being able to access it and saying you can, and perfectly legal people in the US are being deported to a different country's prison where they stand no chance of ever being set free again. And that's because you can access someone's data, because the law enforcement decides they want access to your data. Yeah, your law enforcement may be trustworthy today, right? But will they still be in the future? And that's the key. If you give up your privacy now, when you do need it, it will be gone. And it's not that not that you've got anything to hide. It's that you don't want to share it at the moment.
Yes, I believe it was the movie Anon, where one of the main characters said, "It's not that I have anything to hide, but I don't have anything to show you."
Yes. Yeah.
And
exactly.
Yes. What else on this topic?
I'd like to do a bit more research as to what Proton is actually, how Proton is responding, and what they will actually do. Because they have said they will move just because this law was raised, and I think that's the right response. It would be too late for Proton to try and make decisions about leaving Switzerland if this law had passed. Right, and as you suggested earlier, just because it's failed this time doesn't mean they're not going to try again. Reword it or increase the number of users before it becomes eligible. Whatever, trying to make it soften it a little bit to make it be more acceptable. But the concern is that even if you do ask the public if they've been made so fearful of things like terrorism that they will give up anything, including their private communications, that this law may pass in the future. So it will be interesting to see how Proton actually does respond. And I mean, it's not just Proton. There are other security companies that are based in Switzerland, and I know that again, people have worked on the Swiss privacy reputation for using their companies and using their email services because they are based in Switzerland. Especially when people are leaving US-based servers for exactly the same reason, and shifting onto Swiss-based solutions. If Switzerland doesn't do it, and what these companies actually do, where do they go? Where do they consider there to be privacy or privacy be respected? At least in the short to medium term, if not the long term. I mean, we cannot tell what's going to happen longer term. But what is considered a safe location? Because I think people are already moving their services out of the US for exactly the same reason, and some of them were going to Switzerland. So where if Switzerland is no longer considered a good place to go, where do you move your services? What is a good place to go? So I think it's worth watching what Proton does and where they go, assuming they actually go somewhere, assuming they actually follow through on their decision to leave Switzerland because of this.
Let's see. Personally, I have a country in mind of where laws are a little bit better. In my opinion, I will be researching that one particular country, or I will be researching the top 3 as well. So next time round, I'm happy to share. But first of all, I want to look at the data.
Yeah.
As always, look at the data, be informed, and take action. Any one of those 3 is not enough. 2 out of 3, not quite enough either. We need to do all 3 of them in order to keep ourselves safe. Because as we have seen in the US, it only took them 40 years to roll back Roe v. Wade. 40 years of trying, and they managed. So if we take this as ground zero, basically, for Switzerland, we have a clock. We now have a clock, and it will be running down at some point. So let's stay informed, take action, and talk about it with everyone, just so because if more people are involved and informed, then more people can take action on it.
Yeah, and I think this is again another highlighting of how important it is to have the encryption under your control. So using instant messaging apps like Signal, which provides end-to-end encryption, not just end-to-server encryption. So if you look and people say, it's end-to-end encryption, but it's only actually encryption up into the service provider server, and then another encrypted link back to the second user, is not end-to-end encryption. And too many solutions are exactly that it can end up on the servers of the service provider. And I think even if you just take the fact that if your service provider can reset your password for you, they have access to your data. your data is not encrypted, right? Anybody can access that data. Anybody who has access to those servers, any law enforcement officer can go in there and demand to be able to access that data. So look at the services that you have, and if the service provider can reset your password, then you don't have encryption.
Exactly.
And I think that's an important lesson, is that take control of your encryption. Make sure that the applications that you use are providing encryption to you, and you are the one that controls that encryption, not the service provider. And learn how not to forget your password. Use a password tool, like Bitwarden, or any other service provider that again can't reset your password. So that you only have to remember that one password.
Exactly.
So
that's everything from me.
Take care of your privacy. Take care of your encryption.
Good. Thanks so much for watching. Join us next time, the 4th Tuesday of the month at 4 o'clock in the afternoon UTC. So in most European countries, that's 6 p.m. In the UK, Spain, and Portugal, that will be 5 p.m. In the US East Coast, that will be lunchtime. US West Coast, that will be the morning time. So join us. We will try and publish a little bit of a topic before the meeting, so everyone has time to read up. And we will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.